The baker had Simone, and everybody saw that she could do the job. The lawyer went to the baker and saw Simone at work. The lawyer hired John because the baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. The dentist went to the lawyer and saw John at work. The dentist hired Sophia because the lawyer hired John, because the baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. The farmer went to the dentist and saw Sophia at work. The farmer hired Kate because the dentist hired Sophia, because the lawyer hired John, because the baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. The farmer went to the farmer and saw Kate at work. The farmer hired Paul because the farmer hired Kate, because the dentist hired Sophia, because the lawyer hired John, because the baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. The baker went to the barber and saw Paul at work. He didn't have a clue, but it was thanks to his first move that the barber hired Paul, because the farmer hired Kate, because the dentist hired Sophia, because the lawyer hired John, because the baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. The baker hired Simone. Yeah.
Good morning from Richmond, Virginia. Thank you for joining us for our 4th annual Virginia Ability Forum. I'm Bob Lancaster, Chair of Virginia Ability. We are here live at the Richmond Times-Dispatch broadcast studio. Thanks for the RTD for sponsoring and hosting this year's forum. I would also like to thank all of our 2021 sponsors who have helped make this year's forum and all our programs this past year possible. So thank you very much. With me is Josh Sloan with Sportable and a Virginia Ability board member. Josh, thank you for helping me out today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, Bob. Yeah, I'm super excited.
Great. I know you are very active with Sportable as a volunteer and outreach coordinator, and you host the Sportable podcast. You're very active in sports. In fact, you recently played in a wheelchair rugby tournament, and I'd like to hear about that. My daughter plays rugby, and there's a lot of tackling, and that's a rough sport.
Oh man, it was great. It's the first tournament that that we've been able to participate in since COVID began, and we had a really successful showing. We learned a lot, which we're a newer team, and so we spend a lot of time trying to learn from the other coaches and players on the other teams from around the country, and they're really supportive in that way. So it was just an awesome experience.
That's awesome. So, Josh, you've had a lot of success with Sportable. You started in November 2017. Do you have a maybe an experience that you could share that didn't work out so well? Maybe give us a little bit of go back a few chapters before Sportable.
Absolutely. So actually, it's interesting when it comes to being a wheelchair user and the kind of lack of access that I experience, it tends to be within the physical world. So the thing that really comes to mind for me is when I first got hired at Sportable, and one of, as my job is big part of my job is outreach. And so I had booked with a construction company to do a accessible design training on, for their staff so that they can know about universal design and the various elements of that and aspects of that. And I arrived to the office building and there was steps to get in the front door. That's perfectly normal thing. A lot of times the accessible door is around back or something like that. So I did a lap around the building, couldn't find another entrance. I called, said, hi, I'm here to do this presentation. and I'm trying to get in the building. Where's your accessible entrance? They said, oh, that's going to be a problem. We don't have an accessible entrance. And I was like, well, we're learning a lot. So yeah, I mean, I think for wheelchair users, the built environment is such a huge part of the access that we need. And, you know, for different disability groups, access means a lot of different things. There is no one access or one inclusion. But for my population, that's a huge deal. And so now, no matter how common sense it seems to me, every time I go anywhere, I have to make sure beforehand that I ask, is this space wheelchair accessible? You know, and not do you think it's wheelchair accessible? Not going to bump me up the steps. Is it literally wheelchair accessible? Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to access that space. And so, you know, situations like that, those still happen in my everyday life. If I want to go out to eat, if I want to go to a friend's house, I can't remember the last time I've been to a friend's house that had a bathroom that I could actually get into. However, you know, when it comes to successes and doors that have been opened for me, Sportable really was a huge jump from me, you know, returning to independence and normal life after my spinal cord injury. I was working at a library part-time, which was also a really great opportunity for me. But when Sportable's volunteer and outreach coordinator stepped down, I immediately jumped at the opportunity to get that position and was very grateful that my boss of many years now, Hunter Lehman, was willing to take a chance on me. And, you know, something that I think about a lot, I tried to think about careers once I was disabled, think about careers where my disability wasn't considered something to take a risk on, but it could be considered an asset. And so as an outreach coordinator for a nonprofit that serves people with disabilities, my disability really is an asset because I can speak directly to the value of what we do as an organization.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story. I appreciate that, Josh. We're going to transition now into our forum and to our speakers, which is why you have all joined us today. All right, there we go.
We're getting there.
So we've got a great lineup of speakers. I'm really excited. So I wanted to just start off with, in a recent Times Dispatch interview with Tom Barkin, Federal Reserve Bank Richmond president, who was not one of our speakers. I'd love to get him in a future forum. The article cited that roughly 5 million workers are still sitting out of the labor force. Employers have complained about difficulties finding workers as the U.S. economy has clawed its way back from the widespread shutdowns. So I'll be interested in hearing our speakers' perspectives on this current labor shortage situation. It's somewhat unprecedented. And what does it mean for people with disabilities? Are businesses truly opening their doors to opportunity? I know of one success story, which we're going to share. It's pre-pandemic. And then I'll let our speakers talk about where we are today.
So my name is Alan Griffin. I'm a senior site manager for Ronstadt here at Standard Motor Products in Disputanta, Virginia. So I first met the DARS folks at a networking meeting, and right after the meeting, Donna came right up to us and introduced herself and said what she does with DARS. And I believe her line was something to the effect of, you know, I've got great people, you know, ready to go for whatever jobs you have.
My name is Donna Grumio. I'm the Workforce Development Specialist in the Petersburg office of DARS. And my primary function in the office is to meet with employers in the community, educate them about the benefits of working with our qualified DARS candidates.
As an employer, Ronstadt puts a lot of effort into being inclusive, you know, and understanding that people with different challenges also have different gifts. And that if you put the right person in the right job, there's no reason why we can't all be a success and it work for everybody's benefit.
Mark Hanlon, HR Manager for Standard Motor Products in Prince George County. So first, for us to even have gotten there, it wouldn't have happened without our partnership with Ronstadt In-House Services, or RIS. And it was actually Alan and Ronstadt who came to me and said, what about this option? And I probably said, yeah, why not? Because I don't have any issues with giving anyone an opportunity if they can do the functions of the job.
When we first met Andrew, you know, we could tell that there was a lot there. He knew a lot of the terminology, from the manufacturing and logistics world. He came to us very well prepared conceptually. We have hired about a total of 10 people through DARS, some of that have been to the Wilson Center and some that have not. The DARS folks that we have do a range of roles and they do them all well.
He has everything everyone else that works here as a full-time employee has. He's a guy I would hire 20 of if I could. We want this to be successful. Don't know a manager saying, "Oh, this is a waste of our time." It's worked out really well. DARS, I would work with DARS for any program. It's been that good.
That was a really great video to be able to see the collaboration between DARS and Randstad. Just a quick note before we get started and introduce our first speaker, I would like to remind all the attendees to feel free to post questions for our speakers at any time during the forum, and we will feature a select number of those questions in our Q&A session near the end of the forum. So again, anytime you have a question, type it in the chat. We're not going to lose it. We'll come back to it, and we will answer as many of those as we are able at the end during our Q&A. Today, our first speaker is Ms. Audra Jenkins. Ms. Audra is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Randstad, the world's largest staffing company and a 2021 Top 10 Global Champion for supplier diversity and inclusion. Ms. Jenkins has experience in the workplace and the marketplace, where she provides internal and external clients with guidance for effective strategies in supplier diversity, inclusion, and compliance. Welcome, Ms. Jenkins.
All right. Good morning. Thank you so much, Josh, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Virginia Ability. It's so exciting to be here today. As we go to I have a PowerPoint presentation. I'd love to cue up a little bit about me. I'm really excited and proud of that. Alan Griffin's phenomenal. He's part of the Abilities and Motions Business Resource Group that we have, and so excited about the work he's done with DARS. I think we're going to cue up a slide deck. All right. So effective strategies for opening doors. As we go to the next slide, there's three major areas I want to talk about today. First and foremost is disability employment. The second is touch on COVID-19 and social impact. But also, if you are looking to start an employee resource group or business resource group for disability inclusion, a couple of roadmaps and things to keep in mind. Next slide. So first, we're going to talk about employment opportunities. As we go to the next slide talks about a Bureau of Labor Statistics study. And in the study that came out in 2020, it showed that if you look at this presentation, it has people with disability and people without a disability. And as you can see, overwhelmingly, people without a disability are more in the workforce than people with a disability. And I think that's one of the challenges we have with disability inclusion is how do we get those numbers to align. And I think the opportunity for employers is that when you look at disability inclusion from a workforce perspective, you are tapping into a large, diverse pool of talent, just like the DARS video showed. It also bolsters accessibility and inclusion. You know, one of the challenges I think when we talk about disability or DE&I or ED&I, however you want to word that, is accessibility, making sure that everything we look at is inclusive of all. It also creates positive and long-lasting social impact. When you remove barriers, particularly for disabled youth transitioning into adulthood, you are making them more self-sufficient and less dependent on family members and others to live and have a livelihood. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a question for the audience, and please feel free to chat your responses on this. What stereotypes have you heard about people with disabilities? We want to debunk some of those myths today. I'll give it 15 seconds. I know we've got some sunlight issues. Make sure you guys can see me. All right. Okay. Any stereotypes? Got some great feedback on the video for Alan and the Randstad Henhouse Services Group. I'll give it a couple of more seconds. Thank you, Kathleen. They need accommodations. That's a great stereotype. Not everybody with disability needs accommodation. Any other comments? Concerns. Thank you, Beth. Concerns over safety. That's another stereotype. One more. Thank you, Shannon. That they can't do the job. As we go to the next slide, please keep the comments coming. I want to talk about some of these myths and how we can debunk some of those. The first myth is around people expect non-disabled persons to assist them. I have a personal story. During COVID, I was in a restaurant picking up some food, and I saw a gentleman there, and he was missing his fingers, and he had a thumb and a hand, but not individual fingers. And he was trying to get something out of a dispenser. And I went thinking I was being a good citizen and a good Samaritan, and went and tried to help him with that. He put up his hand and he said, "No, ma'am, thank you, but I got it." So the biggest myth or stereotype is because when you see someone with a disability, don't assume that they're looking for you to assist them. They want to be independent. They want to care for themselves just like anyone else. Another big myth or stereotype is they don't live quote unquote normal lives. What's normal anymore? You know, with COVID-19 and triple pandemic, nothing's really normal. Disabled people go about their lives like anyone else. They meet people, they get married, they have partners, spouses, children, just like everybody else. Another myth or stereotype is most people don't know how to help them or accommodate them. But guess what? We all can learn. We can attend great forums like Virginia Ability is hosting today. We can learn how to build inclusive and accessible workplaces for everyone. We just need to take the time. Let's go to the next slide. Did you know that the Centers for Disease Control says that 26% of adults in the United States have a disability? That's 1 in 4. So think about our wonderful audience here today. 1 in 4 of you could be qualified as a person with a disability. With 26% of the adults in the United States, that's millions of people that's in the workforce or working or just in our society that are walking and living and having a life with disability. Let's move to the next slide. I love this quote by Christopher Reeve, the late Christopher Reeve. If you don't know who that is, if that's before your time, he was the original Superman. And it says, "A hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles." The key words there are strength to persevere in spite of. And I think when we think about a person with a disability, I think that that's a very strong person, and they could be a hero in your place as well. Let's go to the next slide. Let's pivot and talk about briefly COVID-19 and social justice impact. When we talk about COVID-19 and social justice, in 2020, well, the last 18 months in general, we've really gone from crisis to crisis. We've been living in this triple pandemic. First with COVID-19, this global pandemic that none of us that's living today would have ever imagined, experiencing. And no matter who you are and where you are, everybody's been touched by this pandemic in some way, whether it's from sheltering in place or knowing someone who was sick or hospitalized or someone who passed away. Next, there's social justice protest. I think the mark of 2020 will be definitely around social justice and social justice protest. When you think about that, think about people are just like the precipice of what else, one more thing, like the straw that broke the camel's back. It became a floodwater, a cry of people saying enough is enough around this triple pandemic. And then the third pandemic within the pandemic is the Great Resignation. People are really thinking about what is meaningful to them and do they want to do the work they're doing and where they're doing it at. So we now have these 3 major competing incidences, which I call the triple pandemic, that we have to contend with, on top of trying to be more inclusive as an employer. As we go to the next slide, I think it's really critical that we acknowledge the elephant in the room. It's so important that we acknowledge this and make sure that we are making plans, actual plans, to make a difference. First and foremost is diversity, inclusion, and belonging are really critical. The ultimate place for diversity and inclusion is belonging. Everybody, no matter who they are, no matter what their abilities are, they want to belong. Let's be honest, systemic discrimination does exist. We can't just put our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. It does, and we have to find ways and we have to work together to make a difference. Training alone is not going to solve the problem. We need to make sure we have actionable plans and everybody's included in those solutions. As we go to the next slide, let's talk about psychological safety at work. There are several things that we need. First is transparency. Transparency in the sense of, what is your stance on diversity and disability inclusion? Do you have that written somewhere? Is it very knowledgeable, someone that's interested in working at your organization? Do your employees feel like they're connected? You know, one of the challenges of COVID-19 is people feel less connected because they're not seeing each other on a daily basis. Are there meaningful conversations occurring between your leaders and their employees? Can people speak up without fear? Can they share their concerns? Do they have openness about work-life integration? I've gotten rid of the word work-life balance. I only talk about work-life integration because it has all blended together. And it was that way before COVID. We just didn't identify it. But psychological safety is really critical if you want people with disabilities to come forward, share what they need so that we can be more inclusive and accommodating. Next slide. I love this quote by Steve Maraboli that says, "How would your life be different if you stopped making negative, judgmental assumptions about people you encounter? Let today be the day that you look for the good in everyone you meet and respect their journey." The key words there: stop making assumptions and respect their journey. What a beautiful world it would be if we could all do that. As we go to the next slide, let's talk about employee resource groups. If you're looking to start a disability employee resource group or business resource group, this roadmap will give you some key tips on how to do that successfully. So there's a few phases. You want to plan, review, develop, execute, and then you want to measure your success. So let's talk about each of those phases. As we go to the next slide, some of the key opportunities when you're planning for an employee resource group, whether it's a disability inclusion one or any other ED&IA initiative, make sure you're linking it to your current goals of your organization. That's really critical. So whatever if you have an executive diversity council, whatever your CEO has made public statements on, I think that's really important when you're looking at how do you get the business case for your employee resource group. Next, you need to make sure you have an executive sponsor. At Randstad, an executive sponsor is identified as someone that's VP and above, typically someone who reports into the C-suite, and they make sure that they oversee kind of making sure that the success of the business of the ERG, and also act as an ally and advocate and a trusted advisor. Next, you want to have a written business plan. You know, we're required at our organization for our business resource groups to have a business plan, which is reviewed by myself and our CHRO and our CFO, especially if you want to get funding. Also, allyship is really important. When you're thinking about an ERG, don't just think about the target topic or demographic group. Think about allies that you need to make your ERG successful. ERG should be for everyone. So if you're a person without a disability, please consider joining your disability ERG so you can gain awareness and also act as an advocate and a champion in your organization on that topic. Employee engagement is really important, as well as making sure that your ERG has a very clear business impact. Next slide, please. Review and development. I really think that what's critical when you're talking about ERGs is your leaders and volunteers. They're only as good as the people that make up the ERG. So you want to make sure you're doing things to keep them engaged. You know, most people with ERGs, it's an extra job. They're not getting paid to do the ERG. It's just one more thing they're doing. And I think we want to make sure that they're enjoying that so that they're feeling like they're fulfilling their mission, vision in life. So make sure it's linked to something that matters to them. You want to make sure your topics on disability education and raising awareness. You know, what are topics critical to those individuals with disabilities in your organization? Whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's accommodations, whether it's having inclusive language on job postings, different formats. What are the key topics that are critical for your organization? And make sure you're covering those in your ERG. Training is so important. When we know better, we do better. So training is really critical, making sure you have training that let people know how to be a better ally to individuals with disabilities. And then finally, cultural impact. How can you make an impact to shift your culture? so that everyone, regardless of their abilities, feel included, welcomed, valued, and respected. Next slide. Execute and measure. So I think one of the areas that all ERGs do is they measure their membership, rosters, who's members, who are allies, who are participating in their events. It also helps you as an organization improve your overall employee engagement scores. I think one of the things that, people feel more welcomed and inclusive when they feel like they're not alone, when they feel like they're not the only one. So I think that helps when they find out they have a community within your organization. Recruitment metrics, I think that's important. We're in the business of putting people to work at Randstad. So having metrics on individuals with disabilities is really important. And if you're a federal contractor, you are required to track that information to do business with the federal government. Mentorship and sponsorship programs. Having abilities to not only bring in individuals with disabilities in your organization, but also give them an opportunity to mentor and grow and develop so they'll be there for the long run. Next slide, please. I love this quote by Dr. Brené Brown, because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. And I really think that speaks so much volumes around this whole topic of disability inclusion. First, we have to self-accept ourselves, and then we can expect others to accept us as well. And it starts with being able to unmask and be who you truly are in the workplace, with your abilities, with your imperfect, biases, stereotypes, whatever things that your backpack full of stuff that you carry every day. But that's who we truly are as people, as a human being. And we need to be able to accept that. Next slide, please. I just want to say that with disability inclusion, everybody has a role, and it really works together when we're all actively engaged. I feel as though that disability inclusion is one of those things where it's one of those topics where people are afraid to come forward and share that because it's a very personal decision to just disclose your disability. But we want to create a culture where people feel safe to do that. And allies, guess what? You don't have to be perfect. You may struggle at first, and that's okay. The main thing is you're trying, you're learning, and you're getting better every day. And then the cornerstone of equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is mutual respect. Lean into that. Lean into your humanity and let that be the starting point. So leaders, listen, lead, and lift. Listen to your employees, understand what they need, lead by example, and lift by elevating the conversation on ED&I and accessibility in your organization. As we go to the next slide, this quote I love, I use this a lot, is Malala Yousafzai. When the whole world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful. Malala Yousafzai, if you don't know who that is, when she was 13 years old, she was a young Pakistani girl who wanted to get an education. She boarded a school bus, was shot in the face by the Taliban, and disfigured. Unfortunately for her, her family was able to flee to the United Kingdom. She really wanted to fight so all girls around the world could have an education. So if little 13-year-old Malala can speak up against a terror organization, what more can you and I do living in a free democracy around disability inclusion? Next slide. I want to thank you, everyone. Thank you, Virginia Ability, for having me. Please stay in touch. I have a podcast. Check it out, Diversity Deep Dive. You can follow me on Twitter at the Audra Jenkins. You can find me on LinkedIn at Audra Jenkins. So thank you. I'll pass it back to our moderator.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ms. Jenkins, for speaking. And thank you for the work that you do, you and Randstad both do and are doing to ensure workplaces are inclusive and equitable. Also, you guys might have seen a hand coming across the screen like a spider. That is our production assistant setting up the teleprompter and thought it was perfect for October. Our next guest is Dr. Lamondre Pugh, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Billions Strong, which is an identity and empowerment organization designed to bring the billions of voices of persons with disabilities together. Dr. Pugh is a passionate speaker, mentor, and recognized leader for the community of people with disabilities. He has a natural ability to empower audiences, embrace diversity, and create environments where people genuinely belong. So without further ado, welcome Dr. Pugh.
Thank you so much, Josh, for for that introduction. I am Lamondre Pugh. I am a dark-skinned black man with a dark shirt on. I have a full beard, but a bald head, and I'm sitting in my home office in Columbia, South Carolina, with a purple glow behind me, and I'm seated in my wheelchair. I have spinal muscular atrophy. That is the disability that I have. And it is my honor to be with the Virginia Abilities Forum today. And I'm excited about sharing some information with you. And let me start by saying this. First of all, I want to thank you for participating in this forum, because what that says to me is that number one, you're engaged in the process. You're looking for information, and you want to help move this concept forward, whether that be creating stronger companies by really leaning into creating environments where people belong, or whether you're really looking at how do we engage the biggest audience for productivity. And so I applaud you and I appreciate you for being here today. And so what I'm hoping to do is I'm hoping to share some insights, some information, and give you some really practical things that really are designed to, as Audra just said, elevate the conversation. Because I believe that when you elevate the conversation, you elevate thought. And when you elevate thought, you elevate people. And when you elevate people, you elevate the organizations and the society that people make up. So again, that is the objective for today. So as Josh mentioned, I am the CEO of Billion Strong, and we are a global identity organization that seeks to unite, that seeks to elevate, and seeks to educate and empower the global community of people with disabilities. As Audra mentioned in her presentation, she talked about the 1 in 4 Americans that are affected by disability. Well, in Canada and in Australia, that's about 1 in 5. But according to the World Health Organization, it's about 1.3 billion people on the planet that have some form of disability. When you think of 1.3 billion people, that's a lot of people. And 1.3 billion people that are unified, that are speaking with a unified voice, cannot be ignored. And the truth is, we recognize that even those statistics of 1 in 4, 1 in 5, and 1.3 are probably grossly underestimated. We know that that's probably a seriously conservative figure. And there's a reason for that. And so today I want to get into what some of those reasons are and what you can do to help elevate the conversation. So when we talk about identity, because the title of this presentation is The Changing Global Landscape of Disability Identity, I think it's important for us to understand exactly what are we talking about when we talk about identity. Well, a social science definition of identity is that identity is the qualities, the beliefs, the personalities, the looks and or expressions that actually make a person or a group. Now, the way that I like to describe identity is that identity is not only how you see yourself, but it is how you see yourself, but it's also how the world sees you. Now, when we start talking about the barriers that people with disabilities face, or sometimes why people don't want to identify, there's a reason for that. The reason for that, a lot of times, are the stigmas, the concepts, and the view of disability. And I'm talking about from a global perspective. Disability, in many instances, is seen as a negative. It is seen as a problem, that something is wrong, that something is missing, that something is broken, that it is so outside of what is, quote, normal, that it is intrinsically inferior. And that so often, that means that people don't want to associate with, people don't want to identify as, or even being seen as a person with a disability. In many cultures, people with disabilities are viewed as a curse. That you're disabled or you're a person with a disability because you did something wrong, or your family did something wrong, or you're so unfortunate. And the reason it is because some divine entity decided that you weren't worthy and this is your punishment. And we see that. We see that even here in the US in many instances. And what does that do? Because people are viewed as less than, or people are viewed as broken, or even cursed. What does that do? Number one, that sets up in society that this situation is so bad that it's automatically left at, and it's a burden, it's a problem. But it also sets up, even in the view of people with disabilities, of many people with disabilities, that I'm a burden, that something's wrong with me, and that in order for me to really have any place in this society, that I have to either assimilate or I have to completely deny the fact that I have a disability. So it's no wonder that many people don't want to identify, because along with those things also comes discrimination. Along with those things comes exclusion. Along with those things can come a deep degradation of dignity. And this is how things have traditionally been. But as we all know, in these last couple of years, things have changed dramatically. We've seen a global pandemic that pushed pause on the world. That for the past 18 months, life as we knew it in the past has forever changed. Even when we reopened the world and folks went out and really tried to get back into the swing of things, what we realized is the swing of things, that we're totally swinging differently now. That it's a completely different day and time. So how are we approaching things now? Well, when you look at what happened over the past 18 months, as Audra mentioned in her presentation, another piece of that was social justice and what happened in those movements. And one of the first times what we saw in the social justice arenas, we saw allies standing with those groups that were directly affected. We saw people speaking up about this throughout the globe that we never really saw before standing up. And so things are changing. And even the way that people with disabilities view themselves and how the world is beginning to view disability is changing. That's one of the reasons we created Billion Strong, was to be that internal movement of people with disabilities for people with disabilities on a global level that says this is who we are, this is what we bring to the table, and we will not be ignored. Now, why is that so important, particularly when we're talking about the employment of people with disabilities? Well, you heard some of the examples of the myths that's associated with that. And honestly, those myths still persist. But as a business, as an organization, as a company, in order to survive, especially in these times, we've had to look at how do we really tap in to different talent pools. We need to find people who are problem solvers. We need to find people who know what it is to find different ways to get things done. And honestly, what we've discovered is that people with disabilities are amazing problem solvers. They understand how to look at things from a different perspective. And in many instances, they also understand the concept of truly being included because so often we have been excluded. And what's beautiful about this time, even though it's challenging, even though it's hard, what we've discovered are new paths to get things done. Organizations, things that organizations had previously said they couldn't do, they had to do in order to survive. When everyone went home, organizations have said there's no way that we could have a distributed model of people working from home, using their own technologies to do the work. Productivity would suffer, that it would be hard to keep an eye on what's happening. Well, the exact opposite happened in many instances. People saw that either productivity stayed the same or it went up. People found that people actually worked longer because it was more accessible to them. And again, I'm talking about companies that previously said things like that this couldn't be done, that there was no way that we could do this. There have been brand new opportunities that have opened up for traditionally marginalized groups. And I'm not just talking about people with disabilities. There are a number of people that benefited from this. But let me back up and tell you this as well. Disability is the only minority group that anyone can join at any time. In fact, I often say this, through illness, accident, or simply through the process of aging, you will probably experience some form of disability in your lifestyle, in your lifetime. One of the things that I often say is just keep on living, baby. Now, I will tell you, that is not to freak people out. That's not to scare people, but it is the reality. It is the reality of simple human nature and our human existence. That disability will probably occur at some point in your life at various levels and through various means. And so I choose to look at disability as a point of diversity. It is simply a part of who I am. It is not negative. It is not positive. It is just a condition of human existence. And when we begin to think about disability, particularly in the areas of employment, particularly in the area of socialization, we have a tendency when we start talking about disability in the context of diversity to silo disability off, to silo it off into its own little individual thing that takes special requirements, that takes a different approach when it comes down to inclusion. But the truth is, as I said, disability is simply a point of diversity. It is simply a part of who we are. I remember, and this has happened more times than I care to remember, working with people. And after a while, I would inevitably hear this: Lamondre, you're really talented. You're very smart. And of course, my ego is going off, right? Because I'm thinking, yeah, I'm talented, I'm smart. You bring so much value to the table. Again, just, thank you. And then they'll say, when I see you, I don't even see your disability. Boom. Now, hear me. I understand the spirit in which that comment was made. I understand the intent was to compliment. But the truth is, in that one statement, you just denied me a part of who I am. I was just said, it was just said to me that I don't see a part of you. In other words, that part of you doesn't matter. When the truth is, you do need to see my disability. It's a part of who I am. It is not the defining point, but it's certainly a defining point. Just like the fact that I'm a man. Just like the fact that I'm a Black man. Just like the fact that I'm a Black man raised in the South. So when I come to the table, all of that comes to the table with me. And really, if we dig a little bit deeper into that comment, what it's actually saying is, I don't see any deficits. I don't see any of the negative things that are traditionally associated with disability. So for that part of you, I don't see that at all. I'm going to push that out. But the truth is that comment is rooted in ableism. And what is ableism? Well, ableism in itself is a discrimination or a societal prejudice against people with disabilities, or the concept that people with disabilities are intrinsically inferior to those without disabilities. And so, even though it was meant as a compliment, it literally denies an entire portion of who I am, and certainly doesn't recognize the intersectionalities that exist in this. But again, when I come to the table, all of me comes to the table. This is how belonging really can begin to exist in our organizations. This is how creating that sense of belonging begins to develop in our organizations, by recognizing that people are complete, that people are whole, just as they are, that there's nothing missing, that there's nothing broken, because they are a complete human existing in this environment. And when people can embrace the whole of who they are, when an organization can allow someone to bring them their entire selves to the table, then that's how you create an environment where people belong. By not denying or ignoring who they are, but allowing them to bring that perspective, allowing them to bring that experience, allowing them to bring that insight to the table to solve problems for you. That's why businesses exist. It's to solve a problem that people find value in your solution. So bringing my full self to the table brings my full potential to create greater solutions. So I think it's imperative, particularly when we speak from a context of employment, particularly when we speak from a context of opening the doors to opportunity and accessibility, that first of all, we have to elevate our thinking on how we view disability, how we view people with disabilities. And we also have to elevate our perspective on how we interact, not just with disabilities, but with diversity, with really creating an inclusive environment. So let me get to some of the steps to help you do that. First of all, I believe that it's important that we're intentional about our work, that we're intentional about the agenda, that we're intentional about our process to move things forward. You know, when I was a kid, I was fascinated by magicians, and David Copperfield was one of my favorite magicians. And I don't know if you remember this. I may be dating myself a little bit, but I don't know if you remember this. But one of his greatest tricks, one of his greatest feats of magic, was making the Statue of Liberty disappear. And it was a huge thing, broadcast all over network TV. I think it was CBS. And I remember as a kid watching this. And when the Statue of Liberty disappeared, I was blown away. Absolutely stunned, shocked, and amazed, because how could he do that? Where did she go? What was going on? And then, just like that, poof, she reappeared. Now, as I got older, I understood that this was just a trick, that it was indeed an illusion, that the Statue of Liberty did not go anywhere, but there was a framework that was set up to make it look like she disappeared. And I began to think about how does that tie in to this? Well, I know we do a lot of diversity programs, we do a lot of initiatives, and a lot of times what we end up doing is checking the box. In fact, when we start to think about it, we start to look at it from the perspective of over 95% of organizations say that it's a part of their board agenda to be inclusive all the way across the board, but only about 11% or so actually have disability as a part of their agenda. Well, what that means is that it's an illusion. It's the inclusion illusion. You've checked the box, but do you really respect and value the people that this box is supposed to represent? So be intentional. The next thing is to take initiative. Initiative takes courage. Initiative takes direction. Initiative really takes a humility and an honesty to move forward. Find out exactly where you are. The next thing is to be innovative. And innovation is really about being the catalyst to move forward and not being afraid to make mistakes, not being afraid to be honest as to where you are and move forward. And the next thing is to truly be inclusion. I need you to see that there is a difference. I need you to begin to understand what that difference means. Then I need you to engage with these differences. But here's the thing. Understanding has to come before engagement, because engagement without understanding equals chaos. So seek to understand. And finally, become the champions and find the champions. When you do those things, we really can begin to foster a path forward, a path forward. We can really begin to foster an understanding. And then we can really begin to create environments where people truly belong. So I know that we will have a question and answer period later on. So get your questions together and please feel free to ask whatever it is that you will. If we do these things, I believe that we can really begin to understand how we can begin to build environments where all people have a sense of belonging. And if we do that, we'll build much stronger organizations. Thank you so much.
2.
Thank you, Dr. Pugh. I agree that my disability is not something I'm proud of or not proud of, but it is a central part of who I am, and I think it's a central part of what it means to be a human. So thank you so much. A lot of the words that you said really rung true to me. Our final speaker is Ms. Crosby Cromwell, the Chief Partnership Officer with the Valuable 500. The Valuable 500 is the largest community of global CEOs committed to disability inclusion in business and having successfully persuaded 500 multinational organizations to make a public commitment to disability inclusion in their organizations. As their Chief Partnership Officer, Ms. Cromwell is committed to advancing the disability value chain throughout business. Before Ms. Cromwell begins, we have a short video highlighting the impactful work of the Valuable 500. Welcome, Ms. Cromwell.
At Davos 2019, we put disability inclusion center stage for the first time and made a worldwide call.
So this is a crisis, but there is a solution.
To help end the disability inequality crisis by putting disability on the global business leadership agenda. One influential CEO stood with us, Paul Pullman, along with Virgin Media, Omnicom Group and One Young World. Together, we launched the Valuable 500 and asked 500 of the world's biggest business leaders and their brands to join.
500 companies, let's make it possible. Because difference is about humanity.
I'm so proud that Virgin Media has joined the Valuable 500.
All great leaders need to do the right thing by their people.
We need to make our organisations far more accessible and open to difference. We need to celebrate those differences.
Leaders with the ambition and influence to transform the global business system, shaping a society that includes everybody.
I do read sometimes for very long, but always feel close in the most.
And now we have reached our milestone of 500 CEOs, representing over 20 million employees in 35 countries. These include some of the world's most influential organizations. Each and every one of our CEOs has committed to working together to bring real change. What began as a campaign is now a system change community, powered by the Nippon Foundation and supported by the World Economic Forum and the International Disability Alliance. This community of global pioneers will now work together to future-proof business, the economy, and wider society.
I am on a mission to ensure that nobody gets left behind.
Together, we believe that everybody has value, everyone can be capable, and no one should be excluded. Thank you for joining us. Disability is our business.
Good day, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you, and I'm honored to follow the speakers that have come before me. I mean, how do you follow Dr. Pugh? So here we go. This forum is focused on a topic that is the reason that I get up every morning. It's the reason I open my laptop every day, which is advancing access and opportunity for those with disabilities. I wish that the world would allow us to be together in person. I know that was some of the original design for this forum, but I'm coming to you from my apartment in Washington, D.C. So for an audio description, I have long red hair. I'm wearing a multicolored dress today. I have skin that will always burn in the sun. And true to COVID form, I probably have laundry running in the background. It's the world that we all live in, right? So, but my only role today is to encourage, to support, and to amplify the messages that we've been talking about and then we'll continue to discuss as we move forward in the forum. That message is that disability and the awareness of all of its intricacies, complexities, possibility, and yes, even the profitability of this segment of society is on the rise. And here's the thing, we all know that the data that we're using is woefully out of date and almost 10 years old. Both Audra and Lamondre both spent time talking about the stats, and I'm going to follow their lead and reiterate the numbers because they're so critical to this conversation. Many of us in the industry believe that 25% of the global population identifies as having a disability, not the 15%, which is a widely used global statistic. And the $8 trillion figure for global disposable income, well, it's outdated. It's almost 10 years old. So that's where the Valuable 500 comes in. I know we just showed the video. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in a moment, show some slides, give you some updates on where our companies are with their outcomes and their collaboration and their impact. But I recently heard Ronan Dunn, the CEO of Verizon Consumer, say the phrase enlightened self-interest, that this work is truly enlightened self-interest. And I can't stop thinking about this phrase along with what Dr. Pugh said about the inclusion illusion. I wrote it down here in front of me. But when you think about enlightened self-interest, it's when business is able to fully grasp the power and the profit behind universal design, accessible and flexible working environments, and innovative product design for all. That's where we're really going to start to see more rapid change in business and in disability and on the leadership agenda. And I cannot wait for business to see the dollars that live inside this community, that live inside disability innovation, and to get more competitive in this space. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like, bring it on. We are seeing the revolution happen. This conversation lives in everything we do, from business to the boardroom to the classroom. And I've been in this space for almost 20 years, both corporate and nonprofit. And I believe we are at a tipping point like I have never seen when it comes to disability evolution. And the Valuable 500 is your partner in this space. So if we want to go to the next slide, I won't reiterate what you saw in the video, but we were founded in 2019 with Paul Pullman, the then CEO of Unilever, seed funding from Richard Branson, companies like Accenture and Julie Sweet, all of those faces are in front of you, stepping forward to say we care about this issue and we think we can move forward faster, better, stronger together. So if we'll go to the next slide, who we are now is this collection of 500 companies. We announced the 500 on May 18th of this year. Those 500 businesses represent more than 8 trillion in annual revenue, more than 21 million employees worldwide in 41 countries and across 68 sectors. So if we'll go to the next slide. What we're really operating under, what we're building is these 500 companies are working together around our transformation program, which has 6 pillars. So if we'll go to the next slide, this is where we believe that the full disability value chain lives across the business. So if we start at the top right corner of the image in front of you, which says C-suite, that really is all things leadership and CEO. It is the idea that this conversation has moved too slow for too long because the highest levels of leadership have not been at the helm of this conversation. There was a study done of the FTSE 100 out of the UK that though 9% had a disability platform, only 2% had ever talked about disability inside the boardroom. So we're changing that conversation. Culture is everything workplace and workforce. What are you doing for your people, your policies, your practices, the buildings themselves that live inside your company? Customer is everything B2B and B2C. Reporting and research truly go hand in hand. So what do you know about your data, your employees with disabilities? Are you running self-ID campaigns? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel protected in asking those questions and making sure that your employees feel protected? And then once you know the information, whether it be self-ID or accommodations numbers or the gamut of both, what do you do with those stats and those figures? Do you release them internally? Do you release them externally? What's the conversation you have in your annual report? Are you funding things from a philanthropic perspective that have impact in the disability community? All of that goes into research as well. Representation is how disability sounds and looks, where it lives within your marketing materials, your CEO or executive talking points. How are you highlighting disability? So of the 500 companies that came on board with the Valuable 500, only 13 came on with financial support. We're funded by the Nippon Foundation and these 13 companies that we call Iconics. So if we'll go to the next slide. These are our 13 iconic leaders, EY, Salesforce, I'll read through them quickly. The London Stock Exchange Group, Sony, Mahindra out of India, P&G, BBC, Verizon, Omnicom Group, Deloitte, Allianz, Sky, Google, and Apple came on board as our primary technology partner. So these 13 companies are sitting behind the scenes building inclusion tools. And if we could actually go back one slide to the transformation program. Sorry to the person who's working the slides. But those 13 iconic partners are working on solutions and products and tools that align in that transformation program. So if you think about what's happening in the C-suite, if you think about what's happening in customer, if you think about what's happening in culture, these 13 companies are building tools that align with that transformation program, whether that be a brand audit and how your company is seen both internally and externally, whether that be a media hub and changing the way disability looks, hopefully forever, making it fun and professional and sexy and exciting and all the things that you may not be thinking about disability, to Lamondre's beautiful talking points earlier in the day, that there's vast misunderstandings about what disability is, about where it lives, about how it moves. I identify as a person with a disability myself with both anxiety disorder and depression. But if I don't come to the workplace living my authentic self, do you know? Do you know who I am? Am I unleashed in my full power? So those tools will be released to the Valuable 500 over time. What we're hearing from our companies already are early successes, really interesting collaborations. For example, Intertek, the global quality assurance company or risk management company that you may be aware of, has started a collaboration within the collective of looking at inclusive travel from end to end. So Hilton, Airbnb, Heathrow, British Airways, all talking about how the disabled consumer or customer is impacted by a more united continuum of travel. Randstad, who you heard from earlier with Audra, is also a Valuable 500 member. We are hearing fascinating stories of what's coming from our ability to move together faster. So to the last slide, I think that we already gave a little bit of insight to it's what's your move in this? What's your play? Where can you be stronger? Where can you take on more innovation within your company, whether that be hiring, whether that be in your policies and practices? Do you begin internally with your culture and starting to create change? AutoTrader has done some fascinating work around self-disclosure and self-ID. They made sure that any new hire who came into their company had an understanding of what that data is used for and why. They hear, in the virtual world that many of us are living in, they see videos from their employee resource group leaders on why disability matters within the company. There are targeted messaging campaigns 4 times a year. An AutoTrader is up to 13% of their total employee base is self-identifying as having a disability. They have almost 80% of their total employee base responding to these surveys. So we know that there's movement. We're having roundtables and working together across sectors in ways that are showing impact and innovation all the way up to proprietary information. All of this to say this is a moment in time. Some of the stats are bleak. Bob mentioned it as we opened up our session today. There's a labor market shortage. There's work to be done in this space, but we're here together to move it forward. The conversation is changing. If you're seeing the imagery in marketing and media on your TV screen around the Paralympics this summer, things are changing. So I'll stop there. I think we're moving to a conversation between Audra and I, but just look forward to being in a Q&A session with you later. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ms. Cromwell. It's incredible to see all these multinational organizations committed to inclusion of people with disabilities. At this time, I'd like to invite Ms. Jenkins back into the conversation for a discussion with Mrs. Cromwell. As a quick reminder, please feel free to drop all of your questions into the chat at any time, as we would like to have a robust Q&A. So without further ado.
Thank you. Audra, it's good to see you.
Hi, Crosby.
Yeah,
nice to be here.
Yeah, loved your opening session. Thought your words were incredibly relevant and powerful. Loved the quotes you used from Malala and others. So it's interesting. I'm just noticing I've got things in my background I would normally hide, like my Perrier and my groceries. So it is the COVID life we all live. But I would love to have a short conversation with you, I know, before we move back into Q&A. But in your role as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Randstad, I know you're positioned really uniquely to see things that are happening in the US as well as on a global perspective around the change that's taking place in DEI and disability. What do you think right now is creating greater impact? What do you think is changing the narrative, or is it changing?
Thank you, Crosby, for that. I think that's a great question. I think the uptick is really driven by the impact of COVID-19. We've had more conversation around mental health and well-being than I've ever seen in my 20 plus years in my career. I think that's driving it. I think there's also that social impact behavior that's driving decisions of organizations, because today's workers want to work at companies that care about the things that they care about. I think the third thing is raising more opportunities to hybrid workplaces. I like to talk about how people keep talking about going back to the normal, and then I think this is our new normal. I think we need to keep looking forward, and I just think hybrid's going to be here to stay, and because people want that integration and they want to feel safe. People want to have that sense of safety psychologically and physically. So those are 3 things I think that are really driving the conversation, driving organizations to take it more seriously, and to frankly be more actionable in their results and efforts.
No, 100%. I mean, I feel like so much of the conversation we're having with our companies is around what has happened in the last year and a half to 2 years. What does well-being look like? What does normal look like? Unilever's gone so far as to remove the word normal from any of their marketing campaigns, anything that they're putting out into the world, because what does normal mean anyway? So completely agree with you.
So Crosby, I do want to talk to you about, let's flip it and talk about what the research is out there, because I think that's where a lot of companies want to see more research. And maybe you could share a little bit about what the Valuable 500 is doing on research and how we can use that, leverage that. I know all the ED&I practitioners that I know, they really do need the data to help build the business case for the actions, for the budget, for the impact. So can you describe some of that research and how that's going to play a role?
Sure. And some of that is here and now, and some of that is hang on with us. So part of my end game, this is my passion. I say this is why I get up in the morning, is disability. Part of my end game with the Valuable 500 is for us to show truly the profitability that lives inside disability. So we're taking these 500 companies over the course of the next 3 years, really moving forward as a collective, gathering all of the data. Actually, our one major point in time survey with our 500 companies is being released to them this week, called The Valuable Truth. But taking all of that data and showing the profitability that lives inside of it. So that will be coming out over time. Audrey, to your point, the data is woefully absent, or it's lacking, or it's too light. It needs to be updated, and it needs greater substance. One of the surveys or research pieces that we just ran with Tortoise Media came out in May of this year, really looking at the Fortune 500 and the FTSE 100, understanding where disability lives or does not live in the CEO suite. Only one CEO in the FTSE 100 identifies as having a disability. Only 12% have ever, like I said, put that on to their whole disability platform. I think 19% were running internal self-ID campaigns. So we need better research and data, and we've got to get companies comfortable with the fear factor of asking these questions internally, getting their employee base to understand why they're important, and then releasing these numbers publicly so that we can change the dialogue, we can change the conversation so that there can be leadership in this space.
That's an excellent point, Crosby. I could not agree more. I think that the more that we can share best practices, share what our struggles are, the more we can solution together. And I think we're more powerful together than collectively than individually apart. So I'm excited about the Value 500 and the partnership with Randstad. So thank you for that.
No, 100%. And you and I know we had a chance to chat yesterday. We are at the tail end of NDEAM, of National Disability Employment Awareness Month in the state. So in your position, how are you reflecting on your own practices or outcomes as an employer? So if you think about the wins that you all are having now, or what may be coming down the future pipeline for your plans around DEI and disability from an employer perspective.
That's an excellent question. Thank you for that, Crosby. I really have to attribute it to our wonderful business resource group, Abilities in Motion. I mean, they do so much, a small but mighty team of volunteers that really does raise awareness. One example of something I thought was very powerful is in the midst of COVID, and we had to shelter in place, the Abilities in Motion's BRG recommended co-working hours for people with neurodiversity challenges who needed to see other people while they work. So we created Google Hangouts, the Abilities in Motions team did, and you could just log in and they're on our calendar. If we want to work alongside of someone, you don't have to engage with that person, but you can just see and have the comfort of seeing another person working alongside of you. So that helped a lot with COVID-19. The other thing is allyship training. I think people have good intentions, but they need to be coupled with good actions and outcomes. So allyship training helps people to understand where they can be allies, what more can they do, how can they support individual disabilities in our organization, and that's so critical. And then the final thing I think is really important is this is on our leadership agenda. This is something that our CEO chairs our Executive Diversity Council. It's co-chaired by our CFO and pretty much the ELT. And we are really driving the topic of disability inclusion, with our diversity metrics, recruitment slates, making sure that we are looking holistically at how can we make it more inclusive and fair and balanced. And the final thing I would say that is another best practice that we implemented, again, from the Abilities in Motion's BRG recommendation, is we put a disability statement on our job postings. That was a statement basically allowing people to understand that disability inclusion is important at Randstad, and you are welcomed here. And then we also revamped our diversity statement in our job description for talent acquisition. So be inclusive of all. So I think those 2 or 3 things are just examples, are low cost, but very big impact.
No, I mean, you all are doing so much. I mean, thank you for walking us through really practical examples of things that companies can do. I mean, I think part of it is exactly to what you said too, is too few companies are allowing it or pushing it to be leadership led, where it's too often put on the folks who identify to try to change the charge. So the fact that you all have that leadership component is just critical to advancing the conversation. And I know you all, your ERG, your BRG are doing really interesting things internally that's changing the landscape for your company. So yeah, I mean, kudos to you all. And then, you know, be a leader that more companies follow is who you all are. We just held a session in July of this year with our companies talking about those that are building an inclusion strategy for the first time. And just a practical thing that, you know, we talked about is 3 points for building an inclusion strategy is to make sure that you're listening to your people, which is everything you just said, to align it to your business so that it matches with your primary business objectives, because if it's misaligned, it's too easy to pull out and toss away sometimes. And the third is that it's leadership led, so that you really have the buy-in of that CEO or executive engagement. So all of that to say 100%.
Just to add on that, Crosby, I'm so glad you brought that up. We have in our ED&I strategy as a whole, 3 pillars: workplace, marketplace, and business. We try to make sure it's tied to the business. Randstad's in the business of human capital. So if we're putting people to work, that needs to mean all people, regardless of their abilities. I don't even like the term disability. I like the term differently abled, because disability has such negative stigma attached to the word. I'd rather say that we have different abilities versus disability, so that you're not lacking. I love the way Dr. Pugh said it. You know, if you look at everyone as if they're whole on their own, regardless of their characteristics and traits, then they're not lacking anything. And I really love the way he worded that so beautifully.
Yeah, no, and that's a part of what's so fascinating about disability. And I don't know how he said it, like, you know, I don't know how, but it's like basically weight. But disability is the, you know, one group that you can age into or, you know, can move into at any point in your life, and it's incredibly personal, and it's part of those are the labels that we use for ourselves, and claiming the power inside those labels. I mean, a part of my own journey has been going from an ally to self-identifying as an advocate because of the course of change in my own life. So yeah, to your point, it's incredibly personal. It's incredibly important, with the stat of 1 in 4 individuals in the US having a disability, or 1 in 5 globally. So no,
and it's not always visible, is it, right, Crosby? It's not visible. I think that's the other piece too. People assume that disability means someone in a wheelchair, someone that you can physically see. I think we also miss the invisible disabilities that people carry.
Yeah, the statistic is that 80% of disabilities are actually invisible. And so if we think about the change in conversation over the last year of well-being and mental health, I think people, if it's done anything, maybe it's gotten us to honest faster. So we've lived in this collective change. There was a stat that came out from Mintel that over the last quarter, 74% of adults at one point in time felt too overwhelmed to perform the duties of their job. We're still living in this world that is changing. There was research, I think we talked about yesterday, that Rutgers put out, that actually only 1 in 5 individuals with disabilities in the US work from home. So folks with disabilities have been essential workers or have been out in the public during this whole time. And to your point, yes, we need to understand what disability looks like, and it's different than what we've thought in the past, or it's stronger than the stereotypes we've allowed for too long to be the pervasive story. And that's where organizations like A Billion Strong and Dr. Pugh, like Valuable 500, are changing the narrative.
And I like the fact that you're putting out quality content, Crosby, you and Dr. Pugh, because I think the more we know, the more elevated our knowledge is and our abilities to make a change in our organization and our strategy. We can pivot on that. As we're looking at ED&I, and we recently, our Executive Diversity Council added A for accessibility as a recommendation from our Abilities in Motion, BRG, into our everything we produce. I think that's going to be wonderful, because then it makes it real and tangible for leaders. When you see the word accessibility over and over and over again, it makes you mindful of, am I being accessible? Am I making sure that my people have what they need to perform their jobs with or without accommodations? And I think that's what's critical as well. Making sure we're changing the conversation to make it part of the normal conversation of business.
Yeah. And when you understand the innovation and the power and the dollars that live behind it, looking at companies like Microsoft who are fully embracing it from a technology standpoint, and harnessing it for their bottom line, that there's power that lives inside this. So I feel like I'm the choir just saying yes and amen to everything that you're saying. But it's 100%. Yeah.
And the other thing is the untapped. I have to bring it back to the human capital working at Randstad, but Harvard Business Review put out an article recently that over 800 in EMEA, there's going to be a shortage of 800,000 IT related jobs, and there is such a diverse untapped communities, particularly with autism. I know that those repetitive and some of those things that are key to some of those tech roles. I think looking at that, and Microsoft has a whole, use Microsoft as an example. They have a whole autism recruitment process, that I'm really proud that Randstad has supported in the past as Microsoft's one of our clients. So exciting things are coming for sure. And I'm really excited, Crosby, to hear more about what the Value of 500 will do, as well as Billion Strong.
Thanks. And really proud to be partnering with you in this as well. I know we're going to move, I think, to Q&A, moved on soon, but just, one thing that I would say as far as what was mentioned earlier too by Bob with the opening of the labor market shortage, I think something that we really need to talk about and think about is also the way that AI and the algorithms are automatically opting folks out, especially individuals with disabilities who may have gaps in their resumes for health reasons or otherwise, why they needed to step away from the workforce, that get weeded out from an AI perspective. If you think about everything that we went through in the last year after the death of George Floyd and the rise of Black Lives Matter movement, there needs to be a focus on all of our diverse groups and what all of the AI algorithms are doing to weed out individuals from a perspective of what's been built into those codes. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Crosby.
Yeah, Audrey, so good to talk to you. I'm looking forward to Q&A and what's coming next.
Excellent. Thank you, Crosby.
Thank you, Ms. Cromwell and Ms. Jenkins, so much for that lively discussion. And again, thank you both for the important work that you're doing. We've now arrived at the Q&A portion of the forum, and I would like to welcome Dr. Pugh back to the virtual stage and introduce our Q&A moderator, Candice Mraz, with the Richmond Times-Dispatch. As a quick reminder, we really want to hear from you all in the Q&A. Our speakers would love to interact with you. And so please, if you have any questions at all, there are no wrong questions here. There are only interesting ones. So please ask some questions. And without further ado, Ms. Mraz, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Audra and Crosby, that was a fantastic conversation, and I actually wanted to keep it going. So we're gonna come back to that AI discussion in just a minute. But I also want to thank you all very much for elevating the conversation today around opportunity and accessibility. It's been an incredibly robust conversation. We do have a few questions. But I really first want to thank you, Dr. Pugh, for putting the spotlight on that inclusion illusion. That was an incredible conversation. I appreciate your time today and the nuggets of information that you're able to give us in just a few minutes, I think will carry us a long way. So I want to start with just a couple questions from some of our viewers today. Sarah's asking, let's start just sort of about just the dynamics in a workplace. For example, here at the Richmond Times-Dispatch, we consider ourselves inclusive. We're doing the very best we can. We just moved into a new workspace. We're trying to be as accommodating as possible and keeping taking our blinders off, if you will. But there is still an illusion, right? I think that we like to say we're inclusive, but there is still somewhat of an illusion. So Sarah's asking, what are some easy initial changes that companies can make to be more inclusive and accommodating to the building physically and otherwise? So we'll start with you, Audra, if you want to answer that question for Sarah.
Sure, thank you for that. So I would say that one of the the beauties of COVID is it gave offices time to redesign. I mean, at the Ronstadt corporate office in Atlanta, we were able to redesign our offices. We eliminated the cubicles and made long tables, which is very accessible, people with wheelchairs. We also added different levels in a conference room. So it wasn't just a standard table, but you could have a chair that, a space where you can roll up in a wheelchair, but also if you wanted to stand, they had standing levels of desk. So just trying to be more accommodating to all people to make the space comfortable, but also functional for everyone. Another thing I think it's important is looking at what people need. And I think when you look at any type of design or any type of big remodel, checking in to see, is it accessible? Doing just a quick review, a consultation. Many organizations will come in and do that for you, especially if you're committed to hiring people with disabilities. And I think the final thing is sensory. One of the things I'm proud about of the little alcoves at our new office, quiet spaces. People have sensory overload with neurodiversity challenges, and being able to go into a quiet space, whether it's from neurodiversity, stress, anxiety, or a mother that's maybe breastfeeding might need a quiet space, a quiet private space that's closed off. So there's many things you can do that make it accessible. And I don't think you have to do a whole full remodel, but you definitely can tweak some things in your office to create those spaces for those who to be more inclusive and open.
So Crosby, though, how do we convince HR, senior leadership that that's a priority? What are some of those sort of first steps, especially when if an organization is not truly focused or hasn't had any conversation around the culture of diversity inclusion? What are some of those first conversations and first steps we should take?
I mean, I think it goes, and nice to meet you as well, but it goes first to education and to the story of why it matters. And I think to Audra's earlier question about research, there's really important research that you can bring into the conversation to show how universal this is. I mean, first of all, disability isn't asking for these unique things that aren't universal to creating a great working environment for all. For example, Accenture just did some updated research around getting to equal, that they interviewed 30,000 employees with disabilities, and the 8 factors that came out that would make them happier in the workplace, would make retention higher, would make satisfaction higher, would not surprise you or might surprise you, but it's the same thing I think we would all answer. It was role models, flexible working, employee resource groups, fair pay, parental leave, policies that matter to them, being time bound and relevant. So, I mean, yeah, I'm looking at the research in front of me so I could be able to give those. I know that's not about the physical space, right, but I think if you can start to educate that disability isn't different, disability lives already inside of your workforce. To the stat that we said earlier, 80% of all disabilities are hidden or invisible. So it's understanding that this is already inside your employee base, and it needs to be part of your culture for retention, for workplace satisfaction, for reduced overhead. So for folks who are coming to this conversation and need it to be tied to the bottom line, you can do that. You can start there.
So Dr. Pugh, one of our viewers, Victoria, posed a good question that's right in line with this. She says, I'd love to hear where you think the balance lies between ensuring those with different abilities are part of the conversation around policy and changes, but that the burden of education isn't on them.
I think it's a great question, first of all.
It is.
And a pleasure to meet you, Candace. I think that, first of all, the approach has to be that it's on all of us. That it's not just about, oh, let's talk to that guy over there because he's in a wheelchair, so he represents everybody with a disability. That his perspective is the only perspective that comes from that organization or comes from that group. In fact, I'll give you a prime example. Audra mentioned that she doesn't like the word disability because it has those negative connotations attached to it. And I fully understand that. In many instances, I agree. However, my approach is to reclaim the word and make it so that when people, and the reason that I feel that way is because when people see people with disabilities, whether you call it differently able, whether you call it, I remember back in the day, handy-capable, that was ugly. But whatever you call it, when you see people, those connotations are still there. So my thinking is address what it is, say what it is. It's a person with a disability, but then also bring that with the value. Look at that with, I'm empowered, that I'm valuable, that I'm bringing access to it. So the reason that I bring that up is because there's a diversity of opinion within the group. The best thing that I believe you can do is recognize that it's not just on people with disabilities. If we're talking about creating inclusive environments and making certain that perspectives are represented, we all have to be at the table. We all have to have a place at the table so that our voices can be heard, and recognize that one does not speak for all, that there are a diversity of opinions. Just like if you were making a policy about family medical leave, all right? You're not just talking to one person of the family. You're not just, well, we need to talk to all fathers to find out what this is going to be. So it's really about having that diversity of opinion. So not just about the group that's being represented, but about the opinions that are out there as well, and find what works best for your group. And also realize that this is a living process, that things change, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to mess up as long as you're truly trying and it's an earnest mistake. We have got to start creating safe places for people to fall on their face and stop canceling people because, oh, we missed the mark here, but we're working. So I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. I see Audra nodding her head quite a bit.
Yeah.
Audra, one of our viewers is asking the question, LC128 says, I'm the co-chair of our Diversability ERG's recruiting team and wondering if anyone has any suggestions around recruiting strategies and helping our TA team to have a greater success. And I know, Audra, you touched on this a bit in your conversation with us earlier. You want to elaborate on that and answer that question?
Sure. Thank you, Candace. I would say that first and foremost is you need to really create that inclusive language in the job advertisement. It starts there, because if you can't see yourself applying for the opportunity, then you're not going to have contact with the recruiter to start with. You know, one of the things I think about, particularly for women and not just disabled people, but women need to have every single one of those check boxes complete before we apply for a job. And that's a mental, it's a gender barrier that we create ourselves. It's not something that society has said we have to have. We just believe we need to have those things. But if you think about that and couple disability on top of that, there's even more challenges to think about. Is this place going to be inclusive of me? Are they going to have the things I need? Will they accommodate my requests? Will I have to change, anything that I do, my work hours, my, things that I have already on my schedule that's in my routine? So there's so many different things to think about when you're applying for a job, but it starts with a job advertisement. Do you have that inclusive language that gives a person with a disability or any diversity trait the sense that they can belong there? Because at the end of the day, if you don't feel that you're going to be respected, valued, welcomed into the organization, then it doesn't matter whether you have a disability or not. You're not going to apply for that opportunity because you don't think or see yourself there. The other thing is, what is that organization talking about? Are their most senior leaders posting things about equity, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility? Is that on their social media pages? Is that on their main page? Do they have a diversity page? They have things that indicate their inclusivity. One thing that we do at Randstad is we make sure that we are participating in specific diversity awards, particularly Disability In, National Organization on Disability, to demonstrate and publicly, transparently say we're a leading disability employer. So I think those are the things I would look at first, is where the job posting, but also who do you have recruiting? Do you have anybody on your recruitment team with a disability that can add their insights on what would make them more apt to apply for that role? I really believe diverse recruiting teams get diverse results. So I would start there. If you don't have anybody in your team, look at expanding your team or leveraging your other people in your BRG with a disability who could give you some tips on what would make them want to apply for a job or not apply for a job. But the other key is make it as easy as possible.
Absolutely.
The final thing is too, in the job posting, A lot of companies will post a job and a person will go to click on it and they can't, for whatever, maybe their disability or whatever technology they're using, they get stalled. Make it easy for them to apply. Have another way for them to reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm interested in this job and I can't apply to your job, your careers page with my technology. Can I apply some other way by talking to a recruiter or someone in HR?
Yeah. Can I add a little something to that?
Of course.
And it kind of goes back to what Sarah asked about being inclusive and accommodating. Audra mentioned about the technology being a barrier. And the thing that I think is important for all of us to understand is everything is integrated now. You can't speak about the building without speaking about how it interconnects with digital. You can't speak about the digital without speaking about how it interconnects with other systems within the physical structure in itself. And so when we talk about entities existing and being inclusive, we have to think about it from a holistic perspective. Is it inclusive physically? Is it inclusive digitally? Is it inclusive programmatically? And I think that it's important that we all begin to develop an approach that when we're talking about creating environments where people belong, that we have to look at the entire system as it stands, not just as individual pieces blown out. And how are we considering the needs of the individual? If you have an HR system that people cannot access, even if it's just clocking in and clocking out or looking at benefits or what have you, what you're telling that individual is you don't matter because you're not fully included in this process. So I think it's important to take a holistic approach to accessibility, and not just because regulation said so, and not just to the standard of what regulations are out there, but how can people effectively function within these systems that we created, and how can we help them to thrive through these systems we created versus just being here or having access to it. Accessibility is really about maximizing the potential of what you're trying to give people access to. And I think that the approach, the way we think about it, is a big shift and can really be helpful in how we move forward with it.
Yeah, Candace, this is Crosby. If I could add just one, though Audra and Dr. Pugh have covered it so beautifully, is that it's also gotten really personal. Like if we've seen anything change over the past couple of years, is that workplace flexibility and the way I work and how and where and when really matters. I mean, what was the research that came out last year? We're about to have a great migration of 40% of all individuals are dissatisfied in their current situation, and they're about to look for the next thing. I mean, it is beholden on companies to start to prioritize workplace culture in a way that has not been done in the past, because you're going to lose your folks. Accessibility and innovation around accessibility, to Lamondre's point of that being holistic, is so key to workplace satisfaction going forward and keeping the employee base you have in hand on the job, moving productivity and efficiency forward.
Thank you, Crosby. Before I send it back over to Bob, I want to close with a challenging question for all three of you. It's sort of a prediction, if you will. I'd love to, kind of see where you think we're going to go. America's Recovery Powered by Inclusion is this year's theme for the National Disability Employment Awareness Month, as we all know. It reflects the importance of ensuring that people with disabilities have full access to employment and community involvement through the national recovery from COVID-19. So my question for all of you is, and we'll start with Crosby, what's your prediction? You've already touched on it a little bit, but what's your prediction for 2022 and the one must do for businesses to seize this opportunity?
Good Lord. My prediction for 2022
yes,
is that the companies who are getting this right are going to rise to the surface, that the companies who are leading in this conversation are going to start to be more visible in ways than they have in the past. And where you get started is just to act, just to do. To Lamondre's point earlier, the only wrong thing to do right now is to do nothing. We're seeing companies who are not moving out of fear, and fear is actually holding them back from a competitive advantage. So this is going to continue to advance in 2022. We're already seeing the early indications of that. Yeah, and Candace, for me, it's to act.
I love that. Just do. How about you, Audra?
I think the one word I think about is being fearless, in 2022. People being fearless and speaking in bold and speaking out about what they do need from an inclusivity perspective. If you do have a disability, you don't think you're getting what you need, do you know who to go to in your organization to report that or to find out what services or benefits that you have access to? I think that's one thing. The other thing I want to say is I think that companies, they're going to be held accountable, accountable for this population, all diversity demographic groups, because of the Great Resignation. And if we want to ever have a fully functioning, inclusive culture, then we have to start with focusing on belonging, focusing on why people are leaving, getting to the root causes, and making a shift and changing your culture so that people will want to stay and new people will want to come there.
Dr. Pugh.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think the first two answers were brilliant, and I feel it. I think that they are spot on. My prediction for 2022 is that, number one, I believe that the voices are only going to grow louder, and in order for a company to survive, it must be willing to be adaptable. They must be willing to change and to grow and to reevaluate. Obviously, this is basic survival stuff right now because the world has changed so drastically. The economies have shifted in ways that were quite unexpected. And honestly, particularly with things like the supply chain issue that we're facing and the way that the numbers have changed so dramatically, in order to survive, we're going to have to take a fair assessment of where we are and look for new ways to bring new blood, to bring new perspectives, to bring new insights in that. I think that is the currency in which we will exchange in order to really survive and then to begin thriving. I'm excited about 2022 because I believe that it offers new opportunities that we have not seen before. And I'm not just talking about in areas of employment, but I'm also talking about in areas of entrepreneurship. Because one of the things that has happened, and this is true for my life especially, because of discrimination, because of me showing up all disabled, all of a sudden it's like, oh, that job has already been filled. So what I did was I hired myself. And what that does is that you see a lot of people with disabilities becoming entrepreneurs because they're solving a problem for themselves and they're offering solutions to others. So I think that we will see a seismic shift in how we look at employment. And I think we'll also see a seismic shift in terms of where we can source the solutions. So the thing that I think that is a must do for organizations and companies in 2022 is, first of all, drill it down to people. It's about people. It's about finding the best people to solve the solution. And what has happened before, we have excluded certain classes outside of the best.
Right.
Well, the truth is, if you want to survive in this global economy where everything has changed, you're going to have to look at all people. That's including people with all kinds of diverse intersectionalities that have been traditionally marginalized, but who understand from real life experiences how to fight, how to survive, and how to make it. Because that's what your company's going to have to do. Fight, survive, and make it. You want us. You need us. That's it.
Woo, I just got the chills. That was a fantastic way. How empowering for the rest of the day, man. I mean, you can put the spotlight on all of it, Dr. Pugh. I tell you, it was fantastic. We don't have any other comments and questions from our viewers. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bob, but I want to thank you all again very much for for all of you for being fearless today. We have to continue these conversations. And I appreciate all of you helping us put the spotlight on it today. So with that, I'm going to send it right on back over to Bob, and I appreciate you all being with us today.
Thank you to our amazing speakers, not because you present well, which you do, but because you are leaders working to change the attitudes about disability and employment, and more importantly, employment outcomes for people with disabilities. So thank you for all you do and your important messages today. We greatly appreciate it. A special thank you to Deborah Rue, my shout out, Rue Global Impact, and she's co-founder of Billion Strong, for making the connections to our speakers today. So thank you, Deborah. Thank you to our sponsors and to the Richmond Times-Dispatch for hosting our 2021 forum. And also a special thanks to Candace Mraz, who helped coordinate, and behind the scenes production guru, Billy Garland, for your awesome support. And lastly, thank you, Josh, for facilitating today's forum. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. Before I forget, the winner of the $50 Visa gift card is Lindsay Denny. Lindsay will be getting in touch with you. Congratulations. Up next, we will be sending out an invite to 2 drop-in calls for a time to meet and ask questions with several state agencies and Education Institute reps that provide employment and transition services in our community throughout the state. Whether you are an employer or a job seeker, I hope you will join us on November 4th with DARS, DBVI, and VDDHH, and November 9th with VCU, RRTC, and North Star. You'll have to look up the acronyms. I will close with a quote from Keely Catwell, CEO and founder of C-Talent and Zeta Studios. We have to show that disability is not the most interesting thing about us. We are not living to be someone's inspiration. We are entrepreneurs, mothers, fathers, gay best friends, and so much more. And I think that message came across from our speakers today. My prediction for 2022 is that the employment curve will finally start to go down drastically. Thank you for joining us today.
The baker had Simone, and everybody saw that she could do the job. The lawyer went to the baker and saw Simone at work. The lawyer hired John because the baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. The dentist went to the lawyer and saw John at work. The dentist had Sophia because the lawyer had John, because the baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. The farmer went to the dentist and saw Sophia at work. The farmer had Kate because the dentist had Sophia, because the lawyer had John, because the baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. The farmer went to the farmer and saw Kate at work. The farmer had Paul because the farmer had Kate, because the dentist had Sophia, because the lawyer had John, because the baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. The baker went to the barber and saw Paul at work. He didn't have a clue, but it was thanks to his first move that the barber had Paul, because the farmer had Kate, because the dentist had Sophia, because the lawyer had John, because the baker had Simone. The baker had Simone. The baker